I was 24 when I started renting the basement apartment in my grandparents' house. It was a perfect arrangement, affordable rent, while still maintaining some independence. The basement had its own side entrance, an open concept living area with a kitchenette, and a hallway leading to my bedroom, bathroom, and laundry room. A lockable door at the top of the stairs separated my space from the main house. One weekend when my grandparents were away on a trip, I invited my friends Marcus and Tyler over to watch the basketball playoffs. With the house to ourselves, we cranked the music, grabbed beers from the upstairs fridge, and made a night of it. I got a decent buzz going, but nothing too wild. Since my grandparents were gone, I'd left the connecting door unlocked for easier access to the main kitchen. By the end of the game, both my friends decided they were too tipsy to drive home safely, so they crashed on my massive sectional sofa that could easily fit 3 people. I retreated to my bedroom, locked the door out of habit, and fell asleep almost instantly. Hours later, something woke me in the middle of the night. Footsteps overhead. Someone was walking around upstairs. I assumed it was Marcus or Tyler hunting for water or a midnight snack, so I ignored it and tried to drift back to sleep. Minutes later, my doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get into my bedroom. Still half asleep, I figured if I pretended to be out cold, whoever it was would give up and leave me alone. The strategy worked, and I soon fell back asleep. The next morning, Tyler was still passed out on the couch, but Marcus had already left. When Tyler finally stirred, I asked if he'd tried coming into my room during the night. He groggily said no, though he admitted he couldn't remember much after how drunk he'd gotten. We grabbed breakfast sandwiches from a nearby cafe, ate in the backyard, and then he headed home. I spent most of Saturday out with other friends, returning late but sober. Exhausted, I had a quick snack, washed up, and crawled into bed, where I watched TV for about an hour before turning it off. Immediately, I heard creaks and thuds from directly above, footsteps in the upstairs kitchen, similar to the previous night. I sat up, straining to hear more, but the sound stopped. My heart raced as I waited, eventually convincing myself it was just the house settling. I couldn't have been more wrong. The doorknob to my bedroom moved again, followed by a light knock. I froze, not daring to make a sound. I grabbed my phone and frantically texted my family, Marcus and Tyler, hoping against hope that one of them would reply, saying they'd come back. My grandparents didn't answer. They must have been asleep. There was no way I was going to call out, "Who's there?" I quietly slipped out of bed and hid behind my dresser, clutching a trophy as a makeshift weapon. 10 agonizing minutes passed in silence with no more knocking. Finally, I called 911, whispering as quietly as possible while still being audible. The operator kept me on the line until the police arrived, instructing them to meet me at my bedroom window. When an officer tapped on my window, I handed him the key to my side entrance. Moments later, I heard my apartment door open. Only then did I leave my bedroom to meet 2 officers who had arrived. After quickly searching my apartment, we headed upstairs to the main house. I told the officers what each room was before they entered. When they reached my grandparents' bedroom, I heard a commotion about half a minute later. From the hallway, I caught a glimpse of officers yelling at someone under my grandparents' bed. My stomach twisted into knots. I was told to wait downstairs. Minutes later, they escorted a tall, filthy, terrifying-looking man in a sweatshirt and shorts through the house. When they asked if I knew him, I said, "Of course not." The look of hatred he gave me was haunting. He appeared homeless, mentally disturbed, or both. Once he was removed from the house, I felt immense relief. The police advised me to follow up with them if my grandparents wanted to pursue the matter. That night, I texted everyone I knew about what happened, though few responded at that late hour. I called my grandparents first thing in the morning to explain the incident. They were shocked, but since nothing was stolen and the man appeared to be homeless, they decided not to take legal action. I suspect I might have left the front door unlocked the night Marcus and Tyler came over, and he simply walked in while we were blasting music. Or more disturbingly, he could have been in the house much longer than we ever realized. I've always cherished solitude. 5 years ago, I moved to a secluded cabin in the rural wilderness of northern Maine, far from the city's chaos. My property is vast and surrounded by endless woods, with the nearest neighbor miles away. The only sounds are the wind through the trees and occasional birdsong, just the peace I've always wanted. Fishing is my passion. I spend most days on the pristine lake behind my cabin, the perfect escape from everything. I don't mind being alone. I prefer it. My favorite evening ritual involves sitting on my spacious deck with a cold beer, watching the sunset behind the tree line, and listening to the forest come alive with night sounds. It was always peaceful until recently. About 2 weeks ago, I was enjoying my usual evening on the deck when I heard a twig snap in the distance. I dismissed it as wildlife, a deer or raccoon. The woods teem with creatures, and I'd grown accustomed to their noises over the years. But as days passed, the sounds became more frequent. What started as distant twigs snapping and leaves rustling soon evolved into something different. A scratching sound near the window of my spare bedroom. It was faint, almost cautious, as if trying to remain undetected. I stood up, my heart beating faster than normal, and waited. Nothing followed. Just a squirrel, I told myself, though something felt wrong. I decided to go inside and lock up for the night. The next evening, I heard it again. The scratching was closer now, coming from right outside the spare bedroom window. I froze, listening intently, my nerves fraying. Something felt off. I approached the window, pulling back the curtains slightly to investigate. The moonlight illuminated the yard and trees, casting long shadows across the property. Everything appeared normal. No animals, no people. I convinced myself it was a branch brushing against the window, or perhaps just the wind, and went to bed. The following night, the scratching returned, accompanied by light tapping, as if someone were trying to get my attention. My heart skipped as I leapt from bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept through the dark hallway toward the spare bedroom. At the window, I shone my light outside, but found nothing. Just the same empty woods. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air felt heavy, thick with tension. I returned to bed, but couldn't sleep. Every tiny noise amplified in my hypervigilant state. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. The nights continued, and so did the sounds, taps, scratches, and sometimes even faint whispers that seemed to emanate from within the walls. I tried ignoring them, but it grew increasingly difficult. One night, I decided to confront whatever was causing these disturbances. Maybe it was just an animal. I grabbed a crowbar from my shed and cautiously entered the spare bedroom, which I hadn't used in months. The air inside felt stale and untouched. I swept my flashlight around methodically, checking every corner, under the bed, behind the dresser. Nothing. As I turned to leave, I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it that way. My stomach dropped as I slowly approached and pulled open the door. The closet was empty, but as I shone my light into the back corner, I spotted something strange. A small piece of cloth caught on the edge of the wall. It was dark and torn, like a scrap of clothing. My breath caught in my throat. Had someone been inside my home? I backed out of the room, heart pounding, slammed the door shut and bolted it. I couldn't stay in the house another second. I went outside hoping fresh air would clear my mind, but the darkness of the surrounding woods seemed to close in on me. That night, I slept on the couch with a baseball bat within reach. Strangely, I heard nothing. No scratching, no tapping. The silence was almost more unnerving. The next night, I resolved to be brave. I would stay in my bed and refuse to let whatever this was drive me from my own home. But just as sleep began to claim me, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap against the window. I jumped up, heart racing, and grabbed my flashlight. I ran to the spare bedroom, no longer caring how loud my footsteps were. When I pulled back the curtain, I didn't just see the woods, I saw a shadow. Someone was standing just outside, barely visible in the dim light. I froze, blood running cold. There was no denying it now. Someone had been watching me. I ran to the phone and called 911, my hands shaking so violently I could barely dial. "Someone's been outside my house," I stammered to the operator, "and I think they're still here." After giving my address, I hung up and looked around the room. I needed to leave, but as I turned to grab my jacket, I heard something from the hallway, a slow creak. Someone was moving through the house. Without hesitation, I flung open the back door and tore through the woods, running as fast as my legs would carry me, lungs burning with every step. By the time I reached the edge of my property, I could see the flashing lights of police cars in the distance. I slowed down, trembling, and hid behind a tree to watch. Officers arrived with guns drawn, searching the place, but I didn't stick around to learn what they found. I couldn't. I knew that whatever or whoever had been in that house wasn't finished. I wasn't safe there anymore. I haven't returned since, though I followed up with the police to let them know I was all right to prevent a missing person search. The cabin still stands alone in the woods, but it no longer feels like home. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that tapping sound. I don't know who was in my house or what they wanted, but I'm certain of one thing. They were waiting for me, and they're still out there. This happened when I was about 15 years old back in 2008. My parents went out to the casino for the night, leaving just me and my dog Sadie alone at home. Around 11 p.m., I was up messaging friends on Instant Messenger and watching YouTube videos when I heard Sadie barking furiously at something in the living room. Thinking my parents might be returning early, I waited for the sound of the door opening. After about a minute of continued barking with no sign of my parents, I got up to investigate. In the living room, Sadie was facing the windows overlooking our driveway, still barking intensely. The darkness outside made it difficult to see anything clearly. Peering through the window, I could only make out our single car in the driveway, confirming my parents hadn't returned yet. I assumed Sadie had heard a neighbor's car door, or perhaps a particularly loud vehicle passing by on the main road where we lived. I returned to messaging my friends, but over the next 5 minutes, strange noises kept drawing my attention. Sadie would stop and start barking again at irregular intervals. I was about to get up to calm her when I heard what sounded like a knock or rustling at the living room door. Cautiously, I made my way back to the living room to check the windows again. Nothing. Growing nervous, I was too scared to look through the peephole, afraid of what or who might be staring back. I double-checked that the door was locked and was about to leave when suddenly knocking came from the side door of the house. My heart fluttered. Were my parents locked out? Was someone trying to break in? Were there multiple people surrounding the house? Before I could fully process these thoughts, I heard the doorknob of our basement entrance being jiggled, as if someone was trying to force it open. The basement entrance was well hidden, tucked under the deck in our backyard. To find it, you'd either need to already know it existed or be unusually determined to find a way inside. Sadie was now frantic, whimpering and barking louder than ever, racing from room to room trying to locate the threat. It felt like we were completely surrounded. The noises from the basement grew louder until they suddenly stopped. My heart sank as I stood frozen in silence, waiting for the next sound. Then, quick as lightning, Sadie bolted down the stairs and began growling ferociously at whatever was down there. Sadie was normally a gentle golden retriever who wouldn't hurt a fly, but in this moment, I'd never heard her sound more threatening. I felt paralyzed with fear for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, when I realized Sadie had stopped barking and growling, my survival instinct kicked in. I called her back upstairs and locked the interior door that led to the basement. I grabbed our landline phone, I didn't have a cell phone yet, and ran with Sadie into my parents' bedroom closet, where one of our rifles was stored. Armed and terrified, I was about to call 911 when I heard the front door open. Sadie sprinted out despite my protests. Then I heard my parents' voices. Relief flooded through me as I ran into the living room to find them petting Sadie and looking at me strangely. I frantically recounted the night's events, while my mother listened in horror, and my father spent the next hour searching every corner of the house inside and out, rifle in hand. We found nothing, but I didn't sleep at all that night. The following afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. My heart immediately skipped a beat, and I instinctively ran to another room. My father opened the door to find my Uncle Richard standing there with an envelope. Uncle Richard was, to put it mildly, disturbing. He always mistreated my aunt and behaved inappropriately around the younger family members at gatherings. Nothing explicitly illegal that we knew of, but his demeanor was deeply unsettling. Even as a child, I felt anxious whenever he spoke to me. Adults who spent time around him often complained about feeling uncomfortable in his presence. I played volleyball, and his daughter, my cousin Emma, played in a younger league. Despite my feelings about her father, I loved Emma and often helped her team with setting and serving techniques. My mother and I eavesdropped from another room and overheard Uncle Richard say something like, "I tried to stop by last night to drop it off, but no one was home, I guess." Shortly after, my father slammed the door shut. When we asked what happened, my father, trembling with anger, explained that Uncle Richard had been the one prowling around our house the previous night, trying to get inside. He handed me the envelope, which contained a card and gift card thanking me for helping Emma with volleyball. A night of sheer terror had been orchestrated by my creepy uncle. My father threatened him during their confrontation, and after that, we severed ties with him. Looking back, I'm at least grateful to have discovered who was behind the incident. Otherwise, I might have spent years wondering if it had been burglars, a supernatural entity, or something worse. I'm thankful Sadie was there to protect me. She undoubtedly scared him off when he attempted to enter through the basement. Even now, I'm left with disturbing questions. What was he thinking? Why did he need to deliver that card so late at night? Why didn't he leave after receiving no answer at the front door? Why wouldn't he call first to see if we were home? And most troubling of all, what would have happened had he managed to get inside? I was in my final year of high school about a decade ago. I grew up as something of a loner, not bullied, but definitely without many friends. I didn't mind the solitary lifestyle though. Each day I'd trudge through school, then come home and lose myself in video games, those digital worlds becoming my escape. My home life wasn't bad, just sparse. It was only my father and me. I loved him deeply, and he worked endless hours to provide for us. When I was around 11, my mother had fallen in with dangerous people and destructive habits. Dad didn't want me exposed to that environment, so we relocated far away. It was messy, but necessary. He tried repeatedly to get her help over the years, but she always refused. Eventually, she simply vanished from our lives completely. It was heartbreaking, but we moved forward. When I reached my senior year, Dad would occasionally leave for weekend business trips. Some might think it irresponsible to leave a teenager alone for a weekend, but he trusted me. One particular weekend during senior year followed our usual routine. Dad left me money for pizza and soda, a special treat since we never kept soda in the house normally. That night unfolded like all my solo nights. I demolished the pizza, drained most of the soda, and after a short break on the couch, retreated to my room to play some PlayStation. Typically, I'd play Call of Duty, but Grand Theft Auto Online had just been released, so I'd been exploring that instead. After a few hours online, I switched to the single-player story mode and removed my headphones. As much as I loved gaming, I hated wearing headphones for extended periods. I'd been playing the campaign for about an hour when I thought I heard something downstairs. Not loud or alarming sounds, just small vibrations and subtle bumps. I'd been home alone countless times and didn't recall ever noticing such noises before, but they weren't concerning enough to truly frighten me. Still, it was after 1 a.m., and being alone at that hour naturally puts you slightly on edge. Every few minutes, I'd hear what sounded like a soft scuffing noise. I paused my game to listen more carefully, but when I did, I mostly heard silence with only an occasional faint thump, the kind of ambient noise you'd expect in an empty house. The thought of an intruder briefly crossed my mind. I'm even embarrassed to admit that I momentarily wondered if ghosts were real, before immediately dismissing the idea. This internal debate continued for about half an hour before I finally paused the game and moved to my computer chair, determined to just listen without the game sounds interfering. The noises became more regular. The small bumps I'd initially attributed to settling pipes now occurred more frequently, and the vibrations I felt happened almost every second. It was almost like someone was moving around downstairs, though without the accompanying voice I'd expect if my father had returned early. I considered that Dad might have come home unexpectedly, but he would have called, or at least checked, if I was awake. I tried convincing myself I was just being paranoid and decided to go downstairs to prove to myself the house was empty. I crept slowly down the upstairs hallway toward the staircase. As I approached, the muffled sounds grew louder and real fear began to take hold. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but anxiety paralyzed my decision-making. What if no one was there and I wasted the police's time? When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw light illuminating the dark walls from the other side of the house, the kitchen light. While I might have left it on, I'm fairly compulsive about such things and was nearly certain I'd turned it off before heading upstairs. I moved toward the kitchen at a glacial pace. When I was just feet from the doorway, I heard rummaging sounds, like someone digging through cabinets, accompanied by a soft humming voice. The humming was eerily familiar, making this even more unsettling than encountering some burly intruder. I peered into the kitchen, and in the corner by the sink stood a small woman with wild hair flowing in all directions. I had my phone ready to call police, but remained frozen in a mixture of terror and bizarre curiosity. Then I recognized the melody she was humming, "I've Got No Strings," from Disney's Pinocchio. I nearly collapsed because I suddenly knew who this was. My mother. She used to sing that to me when I was very young. One of the few memories of her I still possessed. I couldn't move. I must have been trembling because she heard me, turning around with a broad smile lighting up her face. But this wasn't the mother I remembered. Her teeth appeared rotted, her eyes sunken deep into her face. In a voice that should have been comforting but was somehow deeply disturbing, she said, "There's my baby. What are you doing awake at this hour?" I couldn't respond, standing petrified like a statue. She approached, placing her filthy hand on my shoulder. "What am I going to do with your father? He's always rearranging these cabinets. I swear that man never listens," she said, following it with laughter that wasn't charming, but reminiscent of some grotesque cartoon character. She turned back around, resuming her humming and cabinet search. Finally breaking from my trance, I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door, immediately calling both the police and my father. Dad ensured I stayed locked in my room, hinting that my mother might be dangerous. The police arrived promptly. I heard a brief altercation, my mother screaming at officers to leave her house, followed by a struggle, then silence. Eventually, an officer called up that it was safe to come downstairs. I spoke with the police while another officer drove my mother away. One officer remained parked outside until Dad returned early the next morning to help me feel safer, which I deeply appreciated. When Dad arrived and spoke with the officers, his body language revealed profound discomfort. We had narrowly avoided potential disaster. My mother had 2 knives when apprehended. One she must have brought with her, and the other was a sharp kitchen knife belonging to my father that she'd pocketed. She never threatened to use them, but their presence was terrifying enough. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect was that my mother shouldn't have known where we lived. When we moved, we relocated far away specifically to protect me, and Dad never disclosed our location to her. She had broken in by shattering a downstairs window and climbing through. I never heard it, likely because I had my headphones on. The thought of her humming and wandering downstairs, potentially waiting for my father while I gamed upstairs, still chills me to this day. It's been roughly 10 years now. I've only seen my mother twice since that night. She's been institutionalized for years and has no memory of that incident, though in fairness, she has little memory of anything. It's tragic but true. Every time I hear that stupid Pinocchio song, I freeze up. I just hope someday I can forget the fear I felt that night and find a way to remember my mother in a more positive light. If there's one thing I hate more than anything, it's being waited on. Not at restaurants or service establishments. I mean in life generally. I've always been fiercely independent. When I first met my husband, we clashed initially because we'd literally argue over who would pay the check. Fast forward to now, and we found a comfortable balance. I typically handle the house, particularly the kitchen. I cannot tolerate a messy kitchen or dishes in the sink, and he's notorious for leaving dishes there, which is precisely why I manage the kitchen whenever possible. A few weeks ago, I underwent knee surgery. Last summer, I severely injured my knee playing softball. I stubbornly finished the game, causing additional damage, and postponed surgery as long as possible until the pain became unbearable. The procedure itself didn't worry me. I just wanted it done. My anxiety stemmed from being essentially bedridden for a period. My husband is wonderful, and I knew he'd take excellent care of me, but I also knew the kitchen would become a disaster zone. This probably makes me sound controlling, but I don't care. I simply love maintaining cleanliness. The day arrived, the surgery concluded successfully, and I found myself confined to bed. For me, it felt like imprisonment. Doctors advised minimal movement for several days, except for bathroom trips, and even those required assistance. Fortunately, our bedroom had an attached bathroom, requiring only a few hops when necessary. I remained in bed the first night, but by the next day at home, I was already restless. When hobbling to the bathroom, I realized I was managing movement reasonably well. Before leaving for work, my husband implored me to stay in bed, promising to handle the kitchen and dinner upon his return. But all I could think about was the kitchen mess. It didn't take long to convince myself I could safely make my way downstairs briefly to wash dishes. I navigated the stairs cautiously, admittedly not an easy task. When I reached the bottom, I detected an unusual odor. Not trash or old food, as I'd half expected, but what initially seemed like cheap cologne. This was odd, since my husband doesn't wear cologne. As I took a few more steps, the scent intensified, and recognition struck me. Axe body spray. I immediately identified it from middle school days, when teenage boys would douse themselves after gym class to mask body odor. That distinctive smell is unforgettable. I hobbled further, the smell so overpowering I could almost taste it. I knew my husband wasn't using it. I would have noticed by now in our relationship. I texted him, "Hey, don't be mad." But I hobbled downstairs. Why does it smell like Axe body spray in here? After sending the message, I continued to the kitchen and was surprised to find it relatively tidy. There was just a small plate and fork in the sink. He was doing a commendable job keeping things in order. I washed a few items and noticed the back door was slightly ajar. Not fully open, but definitely not closed. This might seem insignificant to some, but we rarely use that door. When accessing the backyard, we typically use the side door. We usually kept the back door locked with the recycling bin positioned in front of it. I hobbled over to investigate further and saw the bin had shifted several inches, as if someone had opened the door from outside and pushed the bin just enough to allow entry. I suspected I already knew the answer, but texted my husband again. "Did you open the back door for any reason?" When he didn't immediately respond, I hobbled back to the living room and sat on the couch, trying to rationalize the situation. The thought of a break-in seemed far-fetched, given our neighborhood's excellent safety record and minimal crime. My husband called a few minutes later, informing me he'd called the police as a precaution and was heading home from work. After ending the call, I sat silently awaiting their arrival. Suddenly, bang! The living room closet door burst open, and a tall man dressed entirely in black bolted out and fled through the back door. That overwhelming Axe scent intensified as he ran past. I attempted to hop to the window, but only managed a brief glimpse of him as he disappeared alongside the house. I noticed his thick beard before he vanished from sight within seconds. The police arrived shortly after, followed by my husband. I provided what little information I could, though it wasn't much. The most disturbing aspect was the officer's conclusion that the person hadn't broken in. There were no signs of forced entry. This suggested the intruder potentially had a key to our house. My husband immediately purchased new locks for all doors and secured all windows. No neighbors reported anything suspicious, further indicating this person had specifically targeted our house. Most perplexing was that nothing was stolen, which raised the unsettling question: what did he want? If he wasn't covered in Axe body spray and hadn't left that door cracked, whatever he sought, he might have obtained it already. We've all experienced traumatic events, some more severe than others. During high school, something truly horrifying happened when I stayed overnight at my friend Jason's house. Jason's parents were celebrating their anniversary that Saturday night and would be away. He invited me over to keep him company. We invited a few other friends over, played some games, but everyone departed around 11 p.m. Jason and I hung out a while longer before deciding to sleep around 2 a.m. We were dozing off watching The Office when we heard a loud bang downstairs. I thought it sounded like someone at the door, but Jason suggested it was probably a neighbor and we should ignore it. He was exhausted and we were both nearly asleep, so we didn't overreact initially. Maybe it was just a neighbor, or perhaps a bird hitting the house. Just as we convinced ourselves it was nothing concerning, knocking began at the door, almost perfectly rhythmic. The bangs echoed throughout the house. We were clueless about how to respond. This clearly wasn't a neighbor. This was reality, and someone was knocking at 2 a.m. Every few seconds, the knocks would repeat, sometimes forceful, sometimes gentle. Regardless of intensity, the mere thought of someone standing outside at this hour terrified us. We sneaked to a window hoping to glimpse the knocker. Surprisingly, we saw an ordinary-looking man, not someone who appeared to be an addict, criminal, or even suspicious. He looked completely normal, wearing nice sneakers, jeans, and what resembled a polo shirt you might wear golfing. His hair was short, neatly parted and groomed, and he was clean-shaven. Not an intimidating individual, but bewildering and unsettling given the time. We exchanged confused glances, processing the situation and considering appropriate responses. Then the man resumed knocking, and we ducked down. Remember, this was 2 a.m. Even a Girl Scout selling cookies would have been disturbing at this hour. I watched through the window while Jason unsuccessfully attempted to contact his parents. The man eventually walked away, but our relief was short-lived. Approximately 30 seconds later, he returned and taped a note to the front door. He didn't knock this time, just left the note, then sat on the front steps for nearly 5 minutes before departing. I continued watching, but couldn't spot him anymore. We decided he must have gone, and Jason moved to unlock the door. I shouted for him to stop, but he insisted the man had left and wanted to know what the note said. Truthfully, I was curious too. Jason opened the door and grabbed the note. As he removed the tape, we heard a booming voice from across the street. "Hey, you." We froze and looked up. The knocking man emerged from bushes across the street and charged toward the door. We both screamed while shutting the door, and another large man appeared from the bushes, following the first. Jason slammed the door shut and thankfully locked it before they reached us. Both men began pounding, not knocking, but pounding, on the door. Through the window, I saw the larger man, who wasn't there originally, ramming his shoulder against the door. The banging continued relentlessly until Jason called the police. The men outside must have overheard because they fled immediately. Police arrived promptly and managed to contact Jason's parents, who returned home right away. The most disturbing element was the note taped to the door, a violent, detailed message about collecting money. I remember phrases like, "no more running around," and "no more excuses," signed with a name like Marcus. Jason's father denied everything, swearing he had no idea who Marcus was or what money he referred to. The atmosphere around Jason's family remained uncomfortable for some time until the incident was gradually forgotten. Jason and I never forgot that night though, and still discuss it occasionally. I've often wondered if his father was secretly involved in something nefarious. The note addressed him specifically by name. They knew where he lived. Yet after that night, nothing ever happened again. It seems inexplicably strange, but perhaps I don't understand enough about society's shadowy underbelly to determine if this was normal. We never received additional closure despite our efforts. One night, we interrogated his father for an hour attempting to extract information, but he merely rolled his eyes, suggesting it must have been some weirdo playing a prank. Whatever the truth, it was a horrifying night and a haunting memory that ensures I still dislike being home alone. Let me preface by saying this story is somewhat depressing and pains me to recount, but it doesn't change the fact that this was among the most frightening experiences of my life. My father passed away when I was 4 or 5. My mother met Richard when I was 10, and he adopted me several years later. Though Richard wasn't my biological father, he raised me as his own daughter, and I loved him as my real dad. Actually, I hate the phrase real dad. Richard wasn't like a real father. He was my father. He was an exceptional man who treated my mother and me as though we were the most precious things in his world. A few months ago, Richard passed away. He became ill suddenly and died shortly thereafter. It was devastating and hit my mother especially hard. While he was older, the loss was no less painful. My elderly mother was already experiencing declining health, and we worried this might be the final blow. A few nights after the funeral, Mom began calling me in the middle of the night. Each time, I feared the worst, but the reality was different than expected. She was terrified. For 2 consecutive nights, she claimed someone was in her house, that she could hear them moving around. My husband and I felt terrible. Both times, we went over and searched the entire house, finding nothing out of place. No signs of break-ins, nothing stolen, and all entry points were securely locked. On the 3rd day, Mom begged me to stay overnight. If the intruder returned, I could witness it and either confront them or call the police. Honestly, I suspected Mom was exhausted and confusing dreams with reality. Sometime during the night, I thought I heard someone or something coming from the dining room. The sound was jarring, distinctly a voice. For a moment, I believed Mom was right, and people were breaking in. I slowly rose from the couch and moved toward the noise. I dismissed supernatural explanations. I'm not inclined toward such beliefs, and considered that perhaps a homeless person was squatting in an elderly woman's home. These thoughts raced through my mind as I approached the sound. When I was just 1 room away, I clearly distinguished the voice, my mother's. I stopped sneaking and walked directly into the dining room. Mom sat at the head of the table, engaged in a full conversation with nobody. It was profoundly disturbing. Her eyes were wide open but glazed over, as if she was simultaneously awake and asleep. She never looked in my direction, yet somehow knew I'd entered. "Hello, dear," she said cheerfully. "I'm just enjoying some time with Richard." I glanced over and noticed the chair beside her was slightly pulled out, as if she'd prepared it for someone to sit in. As I moved closer, her eyes appeared even more unsettling. I could only see the whites, and combined with her smiling and talking, It created an incredibly eerie scene. I gently attempted to remind her that Richard had passed away, but she just laughed, waved dismissively, and said, "You're so silly. Richard's sitting right here." I was speechless, uncertain how to proceed. Should I allow my grieving elderly mother to believe she was conversing with her deceased husband? Or should I force her back to reality and her crushing heartbreak? She grabbed my hand and, still not looking at me or changing her expression, said, "You can leave now, sweetie. I don't know why I was so frightened. It was just Richard cleaning the house that I heard last night. It was just Richard. It was just Richard." She repeated those last words over and over. Her sleep-talking devolved into gibberish, occasionally punctuated by Richard's name. I hadn't realized until that moment how profoundly my mother had been affected by the loss and how fragile her mind had become. When I tried to move her, she snapped and growled like an animal, saying, "Don't touch me. I'm talking to him." I called my husband, who joined me, and we decided to contact emergency services, not knowing what else to do. When paramedics attempted to take her to the hospital, she became extremely hostile and even violent, not because we were removing her from her home, but because we were separating her from Richard. She kept insisting she couldn't leave because Richard wanted her there. The mind can truly conjure anything when suffering. My mother passed away shortly after that night. May she rest in peace. She never returned to her normal self after that incident. Her half-open eyes and sleepwalking appearance persisted. Doctors explained she had experienced some form of nervous breakdown and, due to her age, could no longer distinguish between reality and imagination. It's profoundly sad. When my biological father died, Mom was devastated, but buried her emotions to raise me. Richard saved her in countless ways. When she lost him, it was as if she'd lost nearly everything. I apologize if this story is depressing, but I'll never forget my mother's behavior that night. I'm skeptical by nature, yet part of me almost believes Richard was present with her. It's unsettling. Even just the idea that my mother believed he was sitting with her disturbs me deeply. Take care of yourselves and tell your loved ones how much you love them whenever possible. I think the word toxic is overused and has become somewhat toxic itself. We toss it around carelessly. One context where this label frequently appears is in discussions of toxic exes. While not all former partners deserve this classification, those who do truly embody the word's meaning. Several years ago, I was engaged. It ended badly. My fiancée secured a job about 100 miles from our hometown, so I relocated with her and established a life there. When we broke up, I had no friends, family, or support network to turn to. Because of my new job, I decided to remain rather than returning home immediately. The specifics of our breakup aren't relevant, but it was definitely unpleasant. She begged for reconciliation, but I couldn't subject myself to that heartache again. After separating, she kept our house while I found a small one-bedroom apartment. I hope to eventually make new friends, though I've always struggled with that. A few weeks post-breakup, I was sitting in my apartment wallowing in self-pity, my favorite activity during that period. The apartment occupied the first floor of the building, though it was actually more like a half-basement. My windows were at ground level, with just my head above ground when standing. The rest of the apartment lay below ground level, providing a splendid view of absolutely nothing to complement my depression. One stormy night, the power went out. Based on previous similar weather events, I anticipated several hours without electricity. Unable to sit in silence as night fell, and with nowhere to go even if I wanted to leave, I lit several candles and sat at my small two-person table. I had enjoyed drawing and coloring in high school and shown some talent before abandoning the hobby. This seemed the perfect opportunity to rediscover something I once loved. While sketching, trying to distract myself from thoughts of my ex, I heard a loud noise nearby. Unfortunately, the darkness prevented me from seeing anything in my apartment beyond the small candlelit area where I sat. I cautiously approached the sound's source and saw what appeared to be a figure lying outside my window. I recoiled in fear, though I recognized the improbability of someone breaking in. They would need to lie flat and essentially crawl through the window. Moreover, hardly anyone in this town even knew me. I returned to the table and extinguished the candles, using darkness to my advantage for better visibility through the window. I wasn't certain what I'd seen. It could have been nothing, or perhaps an animal seeking shelter from the storm. Returning to the window, I now saw clearly. This was neither my imagination nor an animal. Someone dressed entirely in dark clothing was lying on the ground attempting to open my window. Panicked and unsure what to do, I didn't immediately think to call authorities. In my fear and isolation, I decided to contact the only person I really knew, my ex-fiancée. Just as I pressed call, light shone through the window and a brief ringtone melody sounded before being silenced. The call went straight to voicemail. Suspecting what was happening, I immediately called back to confirm it wasn't coincidental. Sure enough, the light and ringtone briefly appeared again before the would-be intruder silenced it. My ex was trying to break into my apartment. At this hour, in this weather, her intentions seemed unmistakably sinister. I began shouting while she continued attempting to force the window open, but thankfully it remained locked. I called the police, and as soon as she heard me on the phone, she fled. I explained everything to the officers upon arrival. Initially skeptical and seemingly annoyed by what they perceived as a trivial complaint, their attitude changed when they examined the window area. They observed the disturbed dirt where someone had been lying and clear signs of attempted forced entry. They finally agreed to investigate my ex's whereabouts. When questioned, she predictably denied everything, claiming she'd been with her new boyfriend and that I needed to move on. This man corroborated her story, stating she'd been at his house all night. Either he was complicit or she was already manipulating him. When I mentioned calling her twice and seeing her phone light up each time, she claimed her phone was malfunctioning, so it couldn't have been her. This was the final straw. I couldn't continue living in this town, especially now feeling unsafe. I paid an early termination fee for my lease and returned home to stay with family until I regained stability. I've had no contact with her since, for which I'm profoundly grateful. My life has improved dramatically without that toxic person disrupting it. Being stalked at night is terrifying. I've read and heard enough stalking stories over the years that I'm almost desensitized to the concept. That's easy to say now, but I'm certain if pursued by some deranged individual, I'd be absolutely terrified. That said, I know firsthand what it's like to stare death in the face. And believe me, it's not always the knife-wielding maniac you need to fear. Last year, I rented a small cottage practically in the middle of nowhere. I'm not particularly social and detest city living, so I wanted to retreat into nature for a while, listening to trees, wind, and wildlife. The cottage was charming, and its wilderness location was perfect. Nestled in the mountains but still receiving abundant afternoon sunlight, it felt like paradise. In these remote areas, wildlife frequently approaches dwellings. Deer or even bears sometimes appear. A few weeks ago, Several bears attempted to access food in my cottage, but were unsuccessful. I wasn't frightened. Actually, I was excited and captured some adorable footage to enjoy for years to come. However, one night at the cottage, situation deteriorated rapidly. I'd accidentally consumed too much alcohol and consequently passed out in the recliner in the main room. To give you an idea of the cottage's size, it had a small kitchen similar to a typical apartment, one main room containing a recliner, small chair with table and bed in the back, plus a small bathroom with walk-in shower. Essentially, it was too compact for two people. Because I'd overindulged, I forgot to lock the door. Not a major concern given the remote location. I lock doors more for peace of mind than necessity, regardless of where I am. However, my nightmare was about to begin. I awoke to sounds of crashing and breaking from the kitchen, where the cottage entrance was located. Initially, I thought I was being punished for the one time I neglected to lock the door. Just my luck to have an intruder in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed my pocket knife and crept toward the doorway. What I discovered makes me wish it had been a human intruder. Rampaging through the kitchen, digging through trash and refrigerated food, was a fully grown mountain lion. Its tail whipped back and forth while it emitted a horrible guttural growling sound. Whether expressing contentment or preparing to attack, I couldn't determine. Either way, I wasn't risking confirmation. I retreated behind the wall, trying to formulate an escape plan. The small bathroom contained a window I believed I could climb through, but I feared making noise would alert the massive cat. As the mountain lion's growling intensified, my fear escalated. Finally, I made a dash for the bathroom. The cat heard me. Have you ever heard a mountain lion's growl? Search it online and imagine that sound mere feet away from you. It's among the most terrifying sounds imaginable. I slid the bathroom door shut as I heard the mountain lion leap into the main room. The bathroom lacked a proper door, featuring only a sliding partition, which I held closed with all my strength while strategizing. As I maintained my grip, the mountain lion began ramming against the door. I screamed, likely agitating the animal further. Fortunately, the bathroom's small size became advantageous. I could hold the door with one hand while reaching across to open the window. Unconcerned about my security deposit, I kicked out the screen and, in one desperate movement, dove through the opening. The moment I released the door, the mountain lion forced it open. My final memory before escaping was seeing its vicious head and hearing its growl as I jumped through the window. I sprinted to my car, thankfully unlocked, and secured myself inside. Without keys, I couldn't drive anywhere, but at least the doors locked. I observed the mountain lion eventually exit the cottage about an hour later. It circled the car for some time, continuing those low, guttural sounds and occasionally baring its teeth. Around dawn, it finally retreated. After confirming its departure, I rushed into the cottage, which was completely destroyed. I grabbed my keys and phone and drove into town. When I called the property owner, he laughed. I'd just experienced the most horrifying night of my life, believing a wild animal would rip my throat open, and this man found it amusing, essentially saying, "Yep, that happens around here." Needless to say, I departed that day. Yes, I had to pay for damages. Don't you just love contracts? Nature is no joke. This was unquestionably my worst life experience, one I wouldn't wish on anyone, except perhaps that property owner. Kidding. Since then, I've found a boyfriend, and honestly don't enjoy solitude as much anymore. Perhaps I'm aging, or maybe this experience fundamentally changed me. All I can say with absolute certainty is that I'm definitely a dog person now. People can be incredibly strange. We can affect others we don't even notice. The thoughts running through some minds are simply bewildering. My story will illustrate exactly what I mean. I was working exhaustive hours, saving money to buy my girlfriend an engagement ring. Spoiler alert, we're married now. We were renting a small house, which was preferable to our previous apartment since we no longer shared walls. I was also saving for a home purchase, and she was doing the same. Because I was working so much, she volunteered for a 5-day corporate retreat with her company. This would earn her substantial overtime, while allowing me to work additional hours beyond my already extensive schedule. Though I'd miss her, it seemed an excellent opportunity to generate extra income, especially with holidays approaching. On Wednesday, when leaving for work, I noticed an unusual smell in my car. Not unpleasant, just peculiar, like perfume a younger woman might wear. Various explanations crossed my mind, but I eventually dismissed it as some insignificant oddity I neither understood nor particularly cared about. That night, I slept terribly. I told myself it was likely because I missed my girlfriend. I was accustomed to her presence, and this was the 3rd consecutive night sleeping alone. I believed I heard noises downstairs throughout the night, but they weren't loud or alarming enough to concern me significantly. Again, I ignored these strange signs, attributing them to house settling or wind. Thursday morning arrived, and I felt completely unrested. I prepared coffee, hoping it would rejuvenate me. When I reached my car, I found it unlocked. I'm usually diligent about locking it, but I'd been working extensively and could have forgotten. Dismissing this, I entered the car and began driving to work. Like the previous day, I detected that perfume scent again. Now some red flags were emerging, but I couldn't conceive what might be happening. Every hypothesis ended with me blaming exhaustion or missing my girlfriend, the most logical explanation, at least to me. Leaving work that evening, the perfume smell in my car was unmistakable. I even asked a co-worker to verify I wasn't imagining it. He confirmed he could definitely smell it too, suggesting it was probably just my girlfriend's perfume that I was suddenly noticing because I missed her. I knew her perfume scent and recognized this wasn't it, but his reasoning seemed plausible, so I accepted his assessment, assuming my olfactory perception was changing. Upon arriving home, that perfume scent permeated everything, genuinely disturbing me now. I kept trying to convince myself my co-worker was correct, but the rationalization wasn't working. I decided to shower, then grab dinner and drinks at a local bar to unwind. My girlfriend would return the following afternoon, and it was my first day off in 13 days, so relaxation felt justified. I returned home late Thursday night, around midnight. That peculiar smell hit me immediately upon opening the door. By now, I was more annoyed than frightened. It was just bizarre and bothersome. I prepared for bed shortly after arriving home, hoping all the strange odors would disappear once my girlfriend returned. I must have fallen asleep briefly because I was awakened by someone climbing into the other side of the bed. Initially, I thought it was my girlfriend. Half asleep, my mind automatically assumed it was her. As she slipped into bed, she shushed me, and I turned away. She snuggled against me in a big spoon position, something she'd never done before. But I was so exhausted and so happy she was home that I didn't. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's stories and want more scary stories like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Also, if you've got your own scary experiences, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. I'll catch you all in the next video.